we watched Nightcrawler this weekend,
Yeah.
and it was my first time seeing. I believe this was your second or third time.
Yeah, probably fifth time watching it.
Fifth time. Okay, so that's
Yeah.
one of your favorite movies. And my first takeaways with Nightcrawler, it's one of those movies that I think that I'll have to rewatch again because it's one of those movies that I think the more you watch it, the more you get from it.
Yeah.
And you said prior to watching this that like I think this is going to be your favorite Jake Gyllenhaal movie, and yeah, his character in this movie, the way they develop Jake Gyllenhaal's character throughout Nightcrawler is what makes it so great because it's like it's almost like how do I compare him to a certain character? It's kind of like if you see the Joker start from Joaquin Phoenix all the way into the Joker
Yeah.
in The Dark Knight, where you see him as like this weird, awkward, shy guy, kind of weird, kind of off putting to some. And then by the end of the movie, he is a fucking monster. But he's a monster that you're rooting for in a way. Like
Yeah.
he's the biggest anti-hero in that movie. And by the end of the movie, first of all, poor Ricky. Ricky did not deserve to have Rick did not deserve what happened to him in the end. But Nightcrawler, absolutely great movie. Highly recommend watching it. And it's a shame that it didn't get more awards when it came out. It should have won an Oscar.
Yeah, it came out in a stacked year. I believe Wolf of Wall Street was in that year. It was in that whole year where Leonardo DiCaprio gets snubbed for it. And I think Dallas Buyers Club was in that year. Gravity.
Her.
Yeah, so there are a lot of movies that came out that year, but I feel like this is one of those movies that's just a hidden classic that it could be your favorite movie of all time and you could have just missed it.
Mhm.
Because this is a movie, it's like not a ton of people talk about it. I know a few people who watched it, but some people are kind of passive to it. But as the first time I watched this movie, I believe I was like 15. So as soon as this movie started, I couldn't stop watching it. And something that stood out to me when I was watching it with you, you're like, "Oh, does this take place in the 80s?" It's like, "No, that's
It
just how
feels
well,
like it.
yeah, it's just how good this movie is filmed and it's how well every scene is crafted because I feel like the cinematography and the score both are really good and then just Jake Gyllenhaal's acting where he just eats up the scenery in every single scene he's in where anytime he's talking to someone you're like what weird kind of off-putting thing is he going to say because it's kind of like he's like the same social problems as Homelander and the Joker. And then he also has kind of those psychotic breaks where he'll be talking to someone and he's like, "Yeah, I heard a lot of people are doing internships and I'm willing to work for free just so I can get some experience. What I am is hardworking, determined." And this guy, he just stole fencing and like some hubcaps and sold it to a construction worker. And then he gets in this weird, intimate relationship because he starts the premise of the movie for people who haven't seen it is he's a nightcrawler. So he basically drives out to crimes or accidents that happen and then he films the footage and the news stations will buy it from him. That's basically how he makes his money, but he ends up getting a little bit too good at it to a point where he starts almost instigating crimes and then getting there before the police and filming it. So, what are your overall thoughts on his progression from just kind of a loserish, weird incel character to all of a sudden he's setting up crimes and then he's forcing the head anchor of the news station to sleep with him. It's wild. It's a wild ride.
That was one that started to pivot for me because he was definitely interested in this woman before,
Yeah.
kind of leading into his, I call it the Sigma male era of his time.
Yeah.
Kind of goes from incel to Sigma in a way. And that was when it started to pivot for me that I liked him as a character because there was this one scene where they were selling the footage and he's like, "I want 15,000." She's like, "Best I can do is 10."
Yeah.
And then he just goes on this insane rant where he's like, "I said 15, don't fucking dick me around," basically. But he said it way cooler than I just said it.
Yeah.
And that was when it pivoted for me. I'm like, oh, this is actually a really sick character.
Yeah.
This guy's a really good, just a character that you can analyze in a film studies class, a movie that you can break down. You can look at the cinematography. And it's like we mentioned with the 80s, it's a timeless classic. Like it's a movie
Yeah.
that I saw it at first. I'm like, oh, this is set in the 80s. And then I see all these different things like, oh, it dropped like Twitter at one point. Like I was like I'll post a tweet or whatever. I'm like, oh, this is actually set in the present day. But it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it. And if you watch it now, it doesn't feel like it's outdated either. It feels like it's a movie that's going to continue to have its timeless, novelty to it.
Yeah, I just like the way that this movie, the aesthetic of LA at night, I feel like is really cool in this movie. And when you asked me if it was filmed, if it was like supposed to take place in the 80s, I'm like, I think so. No, wait, there's a Dodge Charger in it. And that was the only way I could remember. And then just the drama, and I feel like the last part to talk about this movie is Rick. Because you mentioned Rick as a character, but what were your first impressions? Because there's a point where he starts doing it and then he realizes if he has a driver, it'll be a lot easier. So he hires this guy as an intern. What were your overall thoughts on Rick as a character and how the movie ended with him kind of starting his own video production news company?
Rick was his right hand man, and he was like this homeless guy.
Yeah.
I won't spoil too much about the character, but my first thoughts of him, I'm like, this guy's a fucking loser. I don't like this guy.
Yeah.
This guy's just kind of like wimpy, kind of like off-putting, kind of similar, honestly, to Jake Gyllenhaal's character.
Yeah.
And then he's kind of getting into the thick of it. You can tell he's not very happy doing what he's doing,
Yeah.
but it's also what all he can have. He's kind of backed into a corner. He's making okay money. And then, by the end of it, the way the movie ends, definitely think he deserved better because Jake Gyllenhaal kind of treated him like shit the entire movie and never really gave him respect. Just kind of yelled at him, didn't pay him well. So didn't like the way it ended for him, but it also it's a good cinematic element because you build this like, oh, he's gonna get his, and then it just crashes and burns. But I feel like it's good for that particular movie.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely good for that movie overall. This movie is a 10 out of 10 for me. I can't really think of a bad scene in this movie. And
No.
probably my favorite point in this movie is he has this guy who's trying to offer to give him his second truck to work for him. And then he's just like, I want to grab you by the ears and scream in your face. I'm not fucking interested. But what I'm going to do is go home and do some accounting. And the guy's just like, what the? That was the most cursed interaction I've ever had. And then lo and behold, he goes ahead and cuts his brake lines. And then you just see the guy like, Rick's like, what happened? He's like, oh, must have crashed. And he's like, you can't film him. He's one of us. He's like, not anymore. Just the
Oof.
ruthlessness.